My favorite question to fans that say they're real fans is, who's the leading rusher for the LA Rams?
Right.
Most people say Eric Dickerson. It's like, well, you don't know your history. You didn't watch me, obviously.
Yeah. Imagine being the best at what you do, but it never really matters. Week after week, you give everything, but the world only sees losses.
Look at me, son. It's not your fault.
No matter how hard you work, the victories never come. And you are overshadowed not only by the success of others around the league, but the storied past of your own franchise. This is the story Steven Jackson lived, and it's why he became the forgotten workhorse of the NFL.
In this lifetime, you don't have to prove nothing to nobody except yourself.
Welcome back to Unlikely Success. Like, comment, and if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Today, we're diving into the incredible but overlooked career of Rams running back Steven Jackson, a player whose greatness was buried beneath years of losing seasons. In 2004, the St. Louis Rams were coming off the glory days of the greatest show on turf, an era led by Kurt Warner, Marshall Faulk, Isaac Bruce, and Torrey Holt. But by the time they drafted Steven Jackson 24th overall, the wheels were beginning to fall off. You see, Faulk was aging, Warner was gone, and the team's Super Bowl window was being slammed shut. Jackson was brought in as the future of the franchise, and early on, he gave Rams fans a glimmer of hope. By his second season, Jackson took over the starting role from Marshall Faulk. He was quickly able to show flashes of greatness, but it was very different from his predecessor.
As a runner, I think you're an artist. So you make things happen, and very few people could do what Marshall did. But at the same time, he was so creative that I could lean on him and ask him, like, would you try that or would you do that? And he's not just a straight line runner, right? So he's someone I could actually ask those kind of questions to because he was pulled it off, and two, he was creative.
Instead of having Faulk's futuristic style, Jackson had a combination of size, speed, and power that were drawing comparisons to some of the all-time greats of the past. It was a more traditional style of running.
What's that supposed to mean?
It's a compliment if you think about it.
In 2006, Jackson broke out, rushing for over 1,500 yards and adding another 800 receiving yards, with 16 total touchdowns. His receiving and rushing were different than Faulk, but effective nonetheless. He was a bright spot on a team that was otherwise beginning its descent into NFL obscurity for the next decade. The team couldn't capitalize on Jackson's brilliance, as the Rams went 8-8 and missed the playoffs in 2006. And that was as good as it would ever get for their star running back's tenure as far as team success goes. From 2007 to 2012, Jackson's prime years, the Rams were simply awful. During that 6-year span, they failed to win more than 7 games in any season. In fact, they went 15-65 during a particularly brutal 4-year stretch between 2007 and 2011. And through all these losing seasons, Steven Jackson was carrying the team on his back, putting up monster numbers year after year. Between 2005 and 2012, Jackson rushed for over 1,000 yards in 8 consecutive seasons, one of the longest streaks in NFL history. Just to put this in perspective, the only 2 running backs with longer stretches than this were Emmitt Smith and Curtis Martin, and the only 2 who have tied it were Thurman Thomas and LaDainian Tomlinson. One thing these guys all have in common is that they received gold jackets. But because the Rams were constantly losing, Jackson's individual accomplishments never received the recognition they deserved. I mean, if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it?
I don't know.
The problem for the Rams was never Jackson. It was the team around him. The Rams cycled through quarterbacks, head coaches, and offensive coordinators, and none of it worked.
9 seasons, I had 6 coaches,
right?
Counting interim coaches, right?
Yes.
So all I know is turnover.
While other running backs of the time, like LaDainian Tomlinson, Adrian Peterson, and Frank Gore, were leading playoff teams or breaking records, Jackson was grinding it out in relative anonymity. It was as if the football world forgot about him. And worse, they took his greatness for granted.
Before you is the greatest show on turf.
Yeah.
After you is Sean McVay and this offensive explosion.
Right.
In between.
Yeah, I'm just the meat.
Now, let's talk about something that's important to me as a Rams fan, and that's Steven Jackson's legacy and whether he deserves a spot in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Statistically, Jackson's career puts him right in the mix with some of the all-time greats. He finished his career with 11,438 rushing yards, which ranks 18th all-time. That's more than Hall of Famers like O.J. Simpson, Earl Campbell, and even Marshall Faulk. Jackson's versatility also puts him in rare company. He finished with nearly 80 career touchdowns and over 3,600 receiving yards, showcasing his ability to be a threat as both a rusher and a receiver. But if we're going to be honest, Jackson's candidacy for the Hall of Fame is going to be a tough sell. And it's not because of what he did on the field. It's because of what the Rams didn't do off it. They didn't put together a team that could actually win games. And as unfair as it may be, Hall of Fame voters often look for team success.
You just made the list!
The Rams' failure to win games during Jackson's career, combined with the lack of postseason moments, has cast a shadow over his greatness. Unlike other legendary running backs, Jackson never had the chance to shine in the playoffs. And without a signature postseason game or a highlight reel moment, it's hard for voters to put him in. But does that mean he wasn't great? Absolutely not. When we talk about the best running backs of the 2000s and early 2010s, names like Tomlinson, Peterson, and Gore come up, and rightfully so. They're all amazing talents, but Steven Jackson belongs in that conversation too. In terms of consistency and durability, Jackson was second to none. He's the kind of back who could do it all. Run through defenders, break off big plays, and catch passes out of the backfield. The biggest difference between Jackson and his contemporaries was the team around him. Had he played for a more competitive franchise, you can be sure that Jackson would be a Hall of Fame lock by now. His name etched alongside the all-time greats. Instead, an underwhelming supporting cast is holding him back from NFL immortality. Steven Jackson's career is a perfect example of how greatness can be overshadowed by circumstances. He was one of the most talented and consistent running backs of his era, but because of the Rams' constant losing, he will never get the recognition he deserves. But make no mistake, Steven Jackson is one of the greatest running backs to ever play the game. His numbers speak for themselves, and his impact on the Rams during some of their darkest years cannot be overstated. Jackson had to put in work for teams he knew barely had a chance to win single games, let alone have winning records over a full season.
Do you feel like you're almost like the forgotten man, not only as a whole, but for the Rams? Like, I feel like people just go Marshall Faulk and Todd Gurley.
My favorite question to fans that say they're real fans is, who's the leading rusher for the LA Rams?
Right.
Most people say Eric Dickerson. It's like, well, you don't know your history. You didn't watch me, obviously.
Yeah.
And even if the Hall of Fame voters don't recognize it, we will on this channel. Because sometimes the best players are the ones who simply show up, do their job, and let their performances speak for themselves.
And not too many franchises that have had the success at running back, like the St. Louis Rams or the Rams franchise when they were in LA.
You know, the good thing about our franchise is that we love and respect running backs. We have a rich tradition of the position.
Do you root for the Rams? Just to start there.
I do, but I it's bittersweet.
This has been The Unlikely Success.